Hey, lovely people. I am back with episode 2 of American Gothic. Um, so, yeah, episode 2, A Tree Grows in Trinity. That's a reference to A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, in case anyone didn't get that, which is a famous American literary classic, which doesn't really have that much to do with this episode that I can see, other than the tree, which is it's really something. Anyway, let's get down to it. So at the end of the last episode, Caleb was on the run from the burning house. So he runs into the corn and he bumps into this insane scarecrow, and it's just like a tiny moment, but that's the scariest scarecrow that I've literally ever seen. So his house is burnt down. The sheriff wants him found. And he's already sort of starting with this manipulation of trying to set Dr. Crower up sort of for the boy going missing and that kind of thing. And in this episode, we meet Gail and Selena a lot more. So you kind of see the lines drawn up in this episode. So here we kind of get the lines drawn up between the two sides. The sheriff versus the doctor. They're both kind of figures that, you know, historically you would really trust the sheriff and you would really trust the doctor in your town. And then behind them, we have Selena on the sheriff's side. She's the school teacher who's kind of got this other side to her. She's such a great character. And then we get to know Gail a little bit more as well. And she's... we learn that she's a journalist, and she's kind of, the sheriff's kind of hinting that she should leave town, and she's very not intimidated by him, unlike everybody else in the town. So her and the doctor are kind of already teaming up in this episode to try and help Caleb and all that kind of thing. So we get the world building a little bit more throughout this episode. Let's see. Gail introduces herself to the sheriff, and we sort of get reminded that she's Caleb's cousin, and they don't really know each other, and she's not intimidated. The doctor is separated out, and he goes back to the hospital, so he has this sort of subplot of this episode. And then we get our opening music. So this is the first time we get this opening sequence, and it's amazing, and I don't mean in a good way. I kind of love it just because, you know, opening sequences were so edited in this 90s way at this time period, and it's real early 90s style with it's just so cheesy. It's so 90s, and it kind of reminds me of like The Outer Limits meets like Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark. It's kind of very, very TV. So it has that kind of choral sound cue that sort of reminds us of Merlin. I don't know, it's pretty cool. So I find this really funny, but we're back at the search for Caleb, and the sheriff's just let the dogs out, like as if he's hunting a criminal. So we learn that Gail lost her parents when she was 8, and the sheriff's kind of building a story around why he should be in charge of Caleb. The deputy and the doctor are in the car, and the deputy kind of stands up for the sheriff to the doctor, saying, you know, whatever you think about him, he's helped a lot of people. And we learn the deputy's backstory about how the sheriff helped him when he lost his football scholarship, which I kind of think that obviously the sheriff probably engineered that. But they discussed loyalty, which was kind of a theme in the previous episode. And then we get Selena. I love her character. I think it's neat that they named her Selena, which is kind of the name relates to the moon, and it's kind of has like a witchy connotation sometimes. So I think that's kind of a nice choice. It's also got that sibilant kind of sound, makes you think of snakes and stuff, maybe, like, or kind of slinky, you know. So she distracts the doctor while the coroner goes down to the basement where the morgue is, and this is intercut with Caleb still on the run through the sort of forest in the countryside, and and that kind of thing, and the sheriff slowly closing in on him. The sheriff is inexorable, and he's such a good character. He just like chews up the scenery, and he's got this floppy 90s haircut. Amazing. So the deputy asks the doctor about the pen that killed Caleb's dad that he committed suicide with, because it's his pen, and it's really weird. He's like desperate to get it back, so we are definitely aware that something is up with this pen. The doctor agrees to sort of talk to the coroner about it, and the deputy's like, everything's gonna be fine. So this scene with the coroner down in the morgue, it's so good. The atmosphere is set up. It's a little cheesy. It looks a little bit sort of stagey, but you really get this like blue lighting atmosphere. Hi, Grump. And yeah, so he starts his tape recorder without even really looking at the bodies, and he calls himself a lying sack of goat manure because, as we learn later in this episode, goats are his thing. And I kind of like that because goats are kind of associated with the devil, and he's on like the sheriff's side. I know, it's like a tiny thing, but I like these little touches. So there's all this atmosphere going on, and he puts his tape recorder down next to Merlin as he's just reading off the notes that the sheriff gave him for how they want the autopsy to go. And then the coroner says, "God forgive me," and the recorder starts on its own, and we get that someone's at the door, and the whole room starts shaking, and he looks over, and Merlin's body is like staring right at him, and so he just bails, and the lights go out, and yeah, Merlin approaches her body. She's kind of struggling with being dead, basically. So she's crying about that. And then she travels across to where Caleb is, washing his face in the river. And because when she was alive, she was so traumatized, she's sort of coming to terms with that in her afterlife, which is kind of an interesting theme. So she's clearly not like ready to let go of life. Caleb is so emphatic and adorable in this scene. So he's not going to bow down to the sheriff, and she warns him that the sheriff wants to raise Caleb to be just like him and to like be evil and stuff. And Caleb's like, nuh-uh. So he's like basically has this plan that he's just going to hide and raise himself, which I think is, you know, when you're 10, that makes a lot of sense. As an adult, you kind of realize that's not such a great plan. But he throws his sweatshirt to throw off the hunt, and he's just like really casual with Merlin, which I love. He's just like, oh, okay, you're not dead, but you're kind of dead, and he's just okay with that. He just takes it in stride. Selena is still distracting the doctor, and they have a little scene with each other. She's so I realized the way she talks kind of reminds me of Jessica Rabbit. She has this kind of like really slow, everything's flirtatious, and he sort of says that she claims that a bite she got from a child is why she's there, but it's clear that she's been up to something with somebody who is not a child, and she seems to want the tetanus shot to hurt, so we kind of get a sense of how she is or whatever, like the other side of her. I don't know. The Karna is back down in the morgue, and he gets locked in by an unseen force when he pauses to pick up his tape recorder, and we get this like montage. These montages are all through this episode. They are like something out of episode 1 or 2 of Buffy. They're amazing. They're very like just very 90s edit kind of. They would have been very modern at the time, and I love how of their time they are. But yeah, he gets the message written in blood to not bury the truth, and he's all freaked out. And then Gail confronts the sheriff about her parents, so we learn that they were actually locked in a building that was then set on fire. And then Caleb comes upon the cemetery, so he sees 2 grave workers who, there's kind of an interesting thing in this series where there's like the townspeople who are all kind of well-dressed and kind of clean and have nice haircuts and little picket fences. And then there's the other side, and these cemetery workers, I think they're a father and daughter team, and they're sort of unwashed, and they're a bit tasteless. They're making jokes at the gravesite and that kind of thing. So they're like the other half of Trinity that I guess the sheriff wants to ignore, doesn't want to see, doesn't want people to see. And Caleb his family seemed to come more from that element than from the other side of town, which is kind of, I think the idea is that if you fall in with the sheriff, you know, you get a better haircut and a better house. I don't know. Anyway, this is where he finds out that his dad is already buried because they've rushed through this coroner's report and gotten the 2 bodies in the ground. And the tombstone is misspelled, and they're laughing about the misspelling. And Caleb's pretty upset. Meanwhile, the sheriff uses his evil powers to touch a branch that Caleb touched, and he sees through Caleb's trick. And then we get this funny cut of like a crow and the full moon, and Caleb's approaching a house that's like boarded up, but he finds a way in, and it's really spooky in there. And then a hand grabs him, and he runs and locks himself in the room, and there's this like groaning outside the door. Kind of made me think of like a Boo Radley kind of a, you know, big figure. It's not very articulate, and you know, like that kind of thing. So Caleb's really tough, it was really fun. This whole scene reminded me of a Goosebumps episode, just his little stripy shirt and jeans, and that he's a kid, and the way the set looks and everything. It was just very, it's definitely spooky, but it wasn't quite scary, if you know what I mean. So we get growling, and then it's morning. Marilyn wakes him up. She's still adjusting to being dead. I really feel sorry for her. He's really upset because he feels like everybody is dead, his whole family, and he's scared. He doesn't really know what to do, but Marilyn tells him to go out, that the person out there isn't a monster, but needs his help. So Caleb heads out and approaches the person outside, and it's a man, and he's tied up. And so Caleb tells him that, you know, he's going to help him. The guy that's tied up is from The Mummy. You'll recognize his face. He's, I can't remember the actor's name. Anyway, so Caleb is kind to him and goes to get the doctor, and we learn that this guy's name is Saul. And we kind of see that Caleb's not at all like the sheriff. Yeah, he's like a nice person. Meanwhile, the sheriff is making a speech at the cemetery, and I kind of love this. It reminds me of those true crime documentaries where you see somebody at the gravesite, you know, like the husband or the wife or whatever, and they're so sorrowful about the death, but like you find out, or you know, because it's a documentary or whatever, that they actually did it, you know, that kind of grandstanding. So I just reminded me of that. He's so cheesy. I just love him. It's such a cheesy episode. So Gail is there, and she asks the sheriff why tourists always go missing, why this area has the highest missing persons rate, and then she brings up a journalist that's missing. The sheriff's just like, accidents happen, and kind of tries to let Gail know that, you know, she's stepping on his toes. I really like her. She's not going to be intimidated by anybody. I just think she's cool. So then we get this weird... Okay, so basically we get a transition. There's lots of screaming and this weird like montage that is a little bit like the opening sequence of the X-Files or something. Like a tree... Well, it's really just like seeds germinating, but basically it signifies a tree coming out of the grave, and it grows really fast, like it's a whole tree. So there you go, that's the tree of the title. It's like the worst editing, or just like the worst special effects. Sorry. There's something in my throat. So then at the coroner's house, we meet the goats. There's this little child at the door, and the doctor's there, and so he has a flashback of losing his daughter. They are having goat cheesecake, which I'm like, It's either going to be delicious or disgusting. I'm not really sure. And the doctor confronts him about the autopsy. So we learn that the goat is called Eli, and this guy just loves his goats, this coroner. So he confronts him, and the coroner basically says, you better just start accepting the way things are around here, or, bad things are going to happen. But the thing is, the doctor doesn't have any family, so I think he feels a bit like he has nothing to lose, maybe. Then we get Gail in her Mustang convertible in the cutest little 90s print outfit. Adorable. Caleb steps out in front of the car. Just steps in front of a car. And they finally meet and he decides to trust her. And then we have this hilarious bit with the tree getting really big and the grave diggers noticing how big the tree is, and this really, really bad sky thing that's happening. It's kind of effective, actually. I mean, I say it's bad, but I like it. Caleb gets the doctor and Gail to go and give Saul some help, and Gail realizes that he's the reporter that went missing. The sheriff's really mad, and he's walking through the hospital, and it's kind of like one of those walking scenes that were so much in TV shows, or in the 90s and onwards, that West Wing walk and talk, and he's throwing compliments and greeting people and then being mad about the doctor and stuff to his deputy. So the deputy's told he may have to just shoot the doctor, and the deputy gets his pen back from the doctor's office, but they realize where the doctor is, so they head out to the abandoned house. Meanwhile, the coroner comes home and the goat has been decapitated, so it's pretty gross. Meanwhile, Selena is sulking in the car. This is such a good scene for her. It's just a little scene in the car, but we learn so much about her. So basically, she was meant to kill the reporter on the orders of the sheriff, but she kept him as a pet. So that's why he was tied up in that abandoned house. So that's pretty dark, but it gets a little bit darker. We learn that she bit off the reporter's tongue so that he couldn't call for help, and that she's kind of we don't really have to worry because this guy is pretty much dead anyway. So we get the doctor, and he thinks that he's not going to make it back to the hospital either. Gail figures out that Saul wants to see the sunshine one last time. So he gives her his bag with his notes and stuff in it, and there's a bunch of floppy disks. Do you remember floppy disks? He has 8 of them. There's probably one document across all 8 of them. Anyway, yeah, so they figure out that he wants to see the sunshine one last time, and Caleb removes the board so that the light shines down on him, and he dies, basically. There's a bit of a weird montage-y cut thing, and he dies. So, right in front of Caleb. And we're all sort of okay with this for some reason, even though he's 10. But anyway, Caleb's very upset, and the sheriff bursts in. Selena has come up with this, they've come up with this plan. Selena claims that Saul attacked her, and then the sheriff claims that Gage was Saul's partner and was keeping Saul there, and that they were actually criminals. And he just takes the notes from Gail because they're evidence. So whilst we thought we might have some kind of information, now we don't have information. The sheriff has it. Meanwhile, Caleb's running outside and he's calling Merlin, and he's really upset that she told him to go help Saul if Saul was just going to die, and it didn't make any difference. And he's really mad and tells Merlin to just go away and leave him alone. And then the tree from the grave falls on her and on him, and we don't know what happened. He's calling her. So it's a really weird end because I don't really know the point of this tree growing and then just falling, but probably has some kind of significance. And yeah, that's the episode. So here we kind of have the lines drawn between who's on what side, and we really get the sense that some people might like to be on the doctor's side, but they're too far in with the sheriff to get out. And if you piss off the sheriff, somebody is gonna decapitate your favorite goat, which is not cool. yeah, we also get to know that Selena is a complete psycho, which is kind of makes her a great character. And we get this kind of thing of like the two sides, of the with Caleb in the middle. I also like the kind of imagery. There's a lot of maybe religious imagery here of like the tree growing that fast is almost like a miracle that might happen where a saint is, but then it falls over. Sometimes we get like people having visions or corpses' eyes bleeding or that kind of thing. And I don't know. I think that's kind of very cool. We definitely get the sense that this is like a story of good and evil in the South. So there you have it, guys. Episode 2.